will continue to engage with the executive's office and the CBO about how to close that gap. But as our budget director noted about 3 weeks ago or so, given the slower than anticipated recovery, we had also identified an $11 million gap. So we're going to continue to see a slow recovery given this crisis, but it's imperative for us to continue to move forward with this select budget committee to really wrap up our committee discussions on the proposed package in front of us. None of this is easy, and we're all moving as fast as we can. I know the city is not in a unique position as we grapple with both the impact on reserves and revenue, as well as the pressing need in our community. What is unique in the city of Seattle and in the state of Washington is the extremely regressive nature of our taxes, and that's why we passed the Jumpstart progressive payroll tax to help backfill, replenish in full our emergency reserves beginning next year with the amounts that will be allocated or collected at the end of 2021 and replenished to the city in 2022. So it's a two-part process, but trying to be proactive about the regressive nature of our taxes in the city is why we passed the Jumpstart package. I would love for us to jump into the conversation about the amendments in front of us and then finish the conversation in a more robust fashion about what to anticipate throughout the rest of the week later in our conversations today. Okay. With that, Madam Clerk, will you please read into the record item number 1? Madam Clerk, are you on hold? I'm sorry, are you on mute?
There we go, excuse me. Hello. Agenda item 1, review of potential legislation related to Seattle Police Department for briefing and discussion.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Council colleagues, we have in front of us the review of potential legislation related to the SPD budget, and I'm going to turn it over to Allie, who I believe has a chart to show us a number of the pieces of legislation in front of us.
Good morning, council members. Allie Pucci with your council central staff. My colleague Patty is, thank you Patty, is posting a list of 4 pieces of legislation that are on the introduction and referral calendar this afternoon that are needed to implement some of the changes proposed today and discussed in this committee, and as well as a resolution that I will discuss once I briefly describe those 4 pieces of legislation. The first 4 council bills include Council Bill 119861, which would disaggregate the Seattle Police Department's patrol operations PSL so that appropriations for each patrol precinct are controlled separately. Council Bill 119860, that would amend the Jumpstart COVID relief bill to reduce the total amount of spending by about $3 million. Council Bill 119862, that would appropriate that $3 million to the Ledge Department to enter into contracts with community-based organizations to research processes that will promote public safety informed by community needs, and Council Bill 119863 that authorizes an interfund loan to support the investments in the council's work reimagining community safety, and specifically the investments that were approved through amendments to Council Bill 119825 last week to provide funding in the Human Services Department for this community-led work. As I noted, these bills were discussed at committee last week, and in previous committee discussions, it was determined that these budget changes required new legislation, so they will be introduced this afternoon and considered at the special council meeting on Wednesday afternoon. And unless there are questions about those bills, I'll move to the resolution.
Are there any council members that would like to speak to any of these bills that are in front of us here? Okay. Seeing none, thank you, Allie. Please go ahead.
So the 5th piece on this list is Resolution 31962, sponsored by Council members Lewis, Herbold, and Juarez, that will be walked on for introduction and action at the council meeting this afternoon. This resolution establishes the council's intent to create a civilian-led Department of Community Safety and Violence Prevention and what is expected to occur in 2021. My colleague Lish Whitson is available if council members have specific questions about the content of this resolution, but for now I'll turn it back to the chair and the sponsors for further discussion.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Council Members Lewis and Herbold, I believe are the prime sponsors on this. Council colleagues, would you like to speak to this visioning document and what you have outlined in front of us in terms of the resolution that both, I think, addresses 2020 and future work? I think this is a really important element of the work that we're doing here today. So Councilmember Lewis, please take it away.
Thank you so much. And I'll be brief because I did just discuss this an hour ago in council briefing, but just suffice it to say that, we aren't just engaged in a deductive process in talking about the police department. There's an additive component too in the work that is before this council and that we're discussing as a community, which is around how we make sure there is still someone on the other end of that 911 response when people call 911 and are requesting some kind of assistance. And we've seen from our deliberations with the police department and the data that's been shared by the police department that 56% of the 911 calls SPD is currently responding to are non-criminal calls, that those calls represent a variety of public health and low-level kinds of activity that could be addressed by a different type of first responder. We've also seen a considerable number of functions within SPD that community has expressed an interest in maintaining the service, but removing it from sworn SPD chain of command. And a good example of that is 911 dispatch. Given the confluence of providing new community-based forms of first response and transferring certain functions out of the police department, it makes sense to follow the lead of what other jurisdictions and other cities are doing to put those new functions and responsibilities into a civilian public department that is separate from a sworn and armed police department. This is a practice that Minneapolis is currently looking at. Denver, I think, already has one. Albuquerque, New Mexico is looking at a similar practice. Other cities have done similar work to reconstitute entire levels of how they do law enforcement. Philadelphia passed a charter amendment recently, creating a new type of public service officer, similar concept that is unarmed, that has low-level enforcement responsibilities. So this resolution is the first step in setting up a process to create this department, a process that'll be comprehensive, that's going to involve working with community, working with a broad range of stakeholders, and possibly even involving a charter amendment in the November 2021 ballot, where the people of Seattle would get to have the final say at the ballot box over adopting this kind of approach. So with that, I don't have anything else to add except to thank Lish for being extremely diligent in putting this together on a tight timeline, working with a variety of council offices, providing feedback. Certainly want to thank Councilmember Herbold and Councilmember Juarez, as well as staff in both of their offices, and Camila Brown in my office for shepherding this through, and look forward to considering this. This has to be part of the process of our defunding conversation. This is not just a deductive conversation. This is additive about what will continue to provide services, continue to provide a 911 response, and enhance public safety in the city, rather than diminish it, as has been a narrative out in the press that is completely not the intention of this council. And indeed, as shown in this resolution, there are better ways forward and better ways to deliver some of these services, and we're going to have a community conversation about it throughout the rest of this year and into 2021. So with that, I have no additional comments.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Herbold, would you like to add to this?
Sure. Really briefly, in addition to the points that Councilmember Lewis made about the intentions to create a new civilian-led Department of Community Safety and Violence Prevention, I want to lift up the other commitments that the legislation makes for our conversations in 2020, moving into 2021, as relates to the department transfers of several functions of the police department into other departments. Some of these transfers are transfers that the mayor and the chief have themselves identified as priorities, particularly the agreement around our shared interest to transfer 911 and the commitment of the mayor to deliver legislation to this council to do so before the end of the year. The resolution already also outlines what our goals are for our community-led research and participatory budgeting effort, and also identifies what the council's priorities are for SPD response to 911 calls, and also identifies the council's interest to further deprioritize or continue prosecution of certain types of misdemeanors that lead to bias-based policing. Again, these are conversations that we are going to have with the executive moving forward, with the goal of reducing the impacts of policing on Black and Brown communities, impacts that have a long history of disparate impact and that perpetuate injustice in our city. The legislation, the resolution also identifies the council's priorities for out of order layoff requests, asking the chief to make such a request to the Public Safety Civil Service Commission director, and lifts up the community's desire that the chief make these requests to the commission director, focused first on officers with multiple sustained complaints. We are going to have continued conversations with labor relations, the mayor's office, and the chief to identify other possible higher priority reductions in patrol staff. Also, the resolution speaks to the council's commitment to have compliance with our city's charter obligation and our expectation that the chief also comply with the charter obligation to maintain adequate patrol staffing in every district of the city, as well as our expectation that our budget actions are under the supervision and review of the court as it relates to our obligations under their consent decree. And then lastly, I want to echo Councilmember Lewis's thanks to the inclusion from Councilmember Juarez, and specifically call out a description of what that inclusion is, and that's the council's priority to work to create a police misconduct registry that is accessible to the public. And this models some efforts that are being undertaken in the federal government. And again, I thank Councilmember Juarez for bringing this idea forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will also appreciate Councilmember Juarez. I do want to clarify something that I said earlier. Councilmember Juarez has been officially excused. She did ask for an excuse from today's meeting, so just want to make that clear for the record. Are there any other comments or questions on the resolution in front of us, colleagues? Councilmember Sawant and then Councilmember Peterson.
I will be voting yes on this resolution, stating the council's intents and hopes to defund the police in the future. However, my message to the movement is that we have to be clear that a non-binding resolution stating the intent to hope to study defunding the police in the future, let me state that again, the intent to hope to study defunding the police in the future is simply not a substitute for actually defunding the police. The City Council can pass resolutions all year long, so why is it today, when voting on the actual budget, the actual funding of the police, why is it now the time that the majority of the council walks on for a vote, a resolution stating these intentions? Our movement is clearly expected to accept these nice words about the future intentions as accomplished fact. But unfortunately, I believe that would be a serious mistake for our movement to make, because we have seen what happens with promises. In Minneapolis, the city council promised to change the city charter to totally reorganize their police department. And as Socialist Alternative in Minnesota had predicted, rather than taking any action as the city's highest legislative body, the Minneapolis City Council punted that question to the Charter Commission. And again, unfortunately, as Socialist Alternative had predicted, the Charter Commission has said this is not possible. That happened Wednesday last week. So after all the pomp and circumstance of the defunding promises, the Minneapolis Democrats are not defunding the police. And here in Seattle, after my office had publicly pledged to fight for and stand with the movement demanding defunding of the police by at least 50%, 6 other council members, all Democrats, promised a 50% defund, but are now in the process of voting, and as happened last week, voted against reduction of the police budget by 50%, as my office had brought forward an amendment which no other council member voted yes on Wednesday. And so the Democrats on the city council in Seattle are voting to reduce the police budget by less than $3 million, and then are adding $3 million to the police budget to the second quarter supplemental budget, which has not come up yet, but I will be speaking to that also. Last Wednesday, as I said, I proposed defunding the police by 50% now, and as I said, every other council member voted no, saying the budget cuts could not be done in November, even though these reasons that have been stated by the council are not based in fact. In response to the Wednesday, to the idea that this cannot be done by until November, which I don't accept, but even hypothetically accepting that, I also brought forward an amendment defunding the police by 50% starting in November, that is starting on November 1st, and no council member even seconded that proposal. To be clear, defunding the police is not an accounting trick. Moving traffic and parking enforcement out of the police department but keeping its operations unchanged is not what our movement meant by defunding the police. By defunding the police, we mean ending the repression of our communities. By defunding the police, we do not mean budget cuts or austerity. We mean the opposite of that. We mean take money, public monies away from where harm is being done and put it in the communities. So I will be voting yes, as I said, on this resolution because, of course, I support the intents in the resolution. But at the end of the day, genuinely winning defunding of the police and an end to police violence will require a sustained and independently organized movement, and also a democratically organized movement where we hold our movement leaders accountable and where we don't build alliances with the establishment, which ultimately does not stand true to its promises. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Peterson, I saw your hand. I'll also just note that the resolution in front of us was discussed as a draft last month on Friday in July. So I wanted to make sure that that was also noted. Councilmember Peterson, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Mosqueda. So this is regarding this resolution. I want to thank the sponsors of this resolution, as Councilmember Mosqueda said, for providing it to us back on the end of July, and then for updating it today. I'm particularly interested in Section 5, which asks for additional information, asking for a report on how the proposed layoffs would affect general redeployment and response times by precinct. It's very important to have this data about how things would change under the proposals that we're making. And I've heard this statistic a lot about, half of the 911 calls are non-criminal, but I think another good metric to look at, rather than the raw number of calls, is the amount of service time spent on those calls. Priority 1 and Priority 2 calls take longer. Priority 1 calls, such as in-progress calls posing a threat to life, and Priority 2 calls, such as in-progress property crimes, total 71% of service time. So that means only 29% of calls are lower priority than Priority 1 or 2. And I just wanted to point out that metric as well. A big picture question for the sponsors: could you elaborate on the potential scenarios for what happens to the police department in the organizational chart of city government So, for example, as a police department under this resolution, is the vision it would be housed within the new community safety department, or are there multiple scenarios that could occur?
For my perspective, I think there are, to your latter suggestion, multiple scenarios that could occur. I am not considering a scenario where we do not require policing for clarification's sake, but whether or not that policing function would continue to be under traditional police department, and all of the other non-policing entities would be under the Department of Community Safety and Violence Prevention. That's one model. The other model could include the smaller, more focused policing agency to be under that umbrella as well. I think these are all good questions, and I'm sorry for not, in my overview of the resolution, I apologize for not lifting up Councilmember Peterson's, your contribution to this resolution. That was my fault, and I really appreciate your inclusion of requesting the data for the impacts of reduced patrol staffing on police response times. I think that's really important, and I also appreciate your lifting up the fact that number of calls may not be as meaningful as time to respond to calls. So, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Any follow-up?
Oh, sure.
Yes, Councilmember Lewis.
I could just add really briefly to that too, Councilmember Peterson, that there's a lot of different examples around the country of arrangements like this. I mean, like was said, Minneapolis is currently looking at something where the police department would be like a bureau within their successor agency. Denver, Colorado has a system like that where they have sort of a Department of Public Safety and the police are like a bureau within it, still with a chief that runs that bureau who is sworn, but who answers to a civilian director that is in between them and the mayor. It could also be that we develop a system where instead of kind of having like two public safety chiefs, like a fire and a police chief, there would now be like a third director of public safety, and those would sort of be our three public safety top officials, all with independent departments, all that directly account to the mayor. I think the important thing is to not be too prescriptive, because we do want to have an open process where we look at national best practices and consult extensively with community and experts to come up with what is going to be the best division. But there are multiple national models, and all of them involve, speaking to Councilmember Herbold's point, all of them involve still having the ability to have, armed police that can respond to exigent threats. But just in sort of a more specific role where there's other services that can take the role of things that police currently respond to and that they probably should not be responding to. So I hope that provides some clarification.
Excellent. Thank you. Are there any additional comments on the resolution in front of us? Again, this will be up for discussion and vote in full council. Okay, I would just want to thank the sponsors as well and offer sort of a document that I have as an in the hip pocket document for us as we think about the next iterations here. I want to appreciate the sponsors for bringing us this resolution. Patty, if you'd like to bring up the document, I think this is a complementary piece that goes along with the resolution to make it clear that there are actions that are being taken that will be able to be annualized over next year's budget as we begin our discussions in just a few weeks on the fall 2021 budget cycle. There are significant steps that we are taking in this budget that, if continued this fall, will be annualized and result in both reductions and also opportunities for us to invest in community. This is an opportunity for us to show the chart that I had provided as a draft again last month, but to show what's possible. In this summer's rebalancing package, if you scroll up to the very top, we have seen that the rebalancing package is going very far as we can, but not as far as we all know that community is asking us to. Our teams and community members have been working around the clock to really identify all of the places where we can reduce the footprint. There are strategies that we put into place here that can help us in the 2021 cycle really elaborate and annualize these costs. And we knew that we had to make investments now to get funding into community so that community-based solutions have the time to scale up and to take on larger volumes of work in the future. So today is one step in this process. Additionally, as you see towards the end of the chart, what lies in front of us is an opportunity for us to build on the community-led research process that will begin later this year to make sure that decisions are rooted in equity, reducing funding, but also making sure that we're investing in upstream community-led solutions, that we're also addressing things in the criminal legal system and calling for change there. But we have to be intentional as we move forward. This is a document that is intended to be aspirational, that is intended to be a point in time analysis for where there could be further deprioritization, transfers, and reductions that will be baked into our conversations and discussion in this fall cycle. Again, not to be too prescriptive, but to also show how serious considerations are already being penciled out for us to consider for this full council in our budget deliberations this fall. So thank you very much, Patty. Again, this goes to the full resolution in front of us just to show that there's been a lot of work and research done to think about how we can move forward with the 2021 visualization of accomplishing some of the key priorities that are outlined in the resolution. Councilmember Herbold.
Thank you so much. Is there a way for staff to show both sides of the document on the screen together?
I think that can be accomplished, or we could shrink it too, if that'd be helpful.
I just think for the viewing public, I would like to emphasize one of the points that you have made, Chair Mosqueda. I think subtotaling or adding the two first subtotal categories is really important to understand the value. Okay, that'll work. So subtotaling the 10.5 million plus the about 53 million, those two categories I think is a pretty accurate quantification of the value thank you, of the value over the course of a year of the votes that we are taking now for the last 4.5 months of the year. I thank you, Chair Mosqueda, for putting together this document. I really apologize because I know we've talked about it a lot, but it's occurring to me that we are also voting to take what were proposed administrative reductions in the mayor's police budget, and we're voting to make them required reductions. And are they on this document?
You're correct, and they are currently listed under the first item under additional cuts for consideration. I think I know where you're headed with that. Given that this is a point-in-time draft, pull it up into the upper categories. We can definitely do that and recirculate to folks. Yep. And also happy to include any additional feedback that you have, but this is exactly the purpose for us to have a kind of a menu in front of us, and we did want to identify the pieces where we are voting today through our actions and sort of identifying those commitments that are being put in the resolution. So your point is very well taken, and that edit will be made.
And I think conceptually, the things that I'm thinking about as sort of our starting point for our September budget discussions are all the things under reductions and anticipated transfers. That's our those things should not be in the proposed budget coming out of the mayor's office, because we've already made these decisions. And so I think conceptually, I'm thinking of this as our starting point is a reduced 2021 budget of about 75, $75 million, I think, is my rough math of that.
Perfect. That's right. Thank you for that feedback. We will make that edit. And again, just a point in time reference to some of the items that we were actualizing in terms of cuts this year, items that could be annualized next year as we get into the fall budget, and items for future conversation and discussion that would also yield additional reductions to free up solutions for community-led process. Thanks again, Patty. Okay, seeing no additional comments or questions on the resolution in front of us, Councilmember Peterson, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Mosqueda. I just want to understand the attachment 2. I didn't, that was not circulated earlier, and I just wanted to understand the meaning of that. So if there are lots of things that I like about Resolution 31962, and the enumeration or list of aspirational reductions, however, is something that I think would require more time to get comfortable with. So I just wanted to be clear that if somebody votes in favor of Resolution 31962, they're not necessarily voting in favor of those reductions.
That's correct. Councilmember Herbold, did you have anything to add to that?
No, just that we had this conversation about whether or not it would be part of the resolution, and we came to the conclusion that it's a good visioning document, but that it should not be part of the resolution.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Councilmember Peterson. Okay, colleagues, I think that gets us through the first part of our agenda today. Thank you for the discussion. Allie, let's go to item number 2. And Madam Clerk, could you please read item number 2 into the record?
Agenda item 2, Council Bill 119825, relating to the city's response to the 2020 COVID-19 crisis, for discussion and possible vote.
Thank you very much. Allie, let's turn it back over to you to walk us through item number 2 here and the various amendments in front of us.
Okay, item number 2 relates to Council Bill 119825, as just described by Amelia, our clerk. I will just note here there are about 7 amendments, and there are a few options for about 3 of the amendments. So I will do my best to help walk us through these and highlight where there are there's only one choice amongst the options. So the first amendment, Amendment B, as posted to the agenda, makes technical and clarifying amendments to Council Bill 119825. This includes correcting a reduction in the capital projects appropriations that was double counted, and adding in the number for Resolution 31962, where it's referenced in several provisos, adds language affirming intent to remain in alignment with the consent decree, and modifies wording in Section 24 that includes the proviso that was imposed on command staff salaries as amended last week. The modification here would impose the proviso on a specific amount of money budgeted for the command staff salaries rather than the entire police department budget. That is Amendment B as posted to the agenda. There are 2 competing options that were distributed this morning of this amendment, Amendments B1 and B2. I'll describe them now and note again that only one of these options can pass, B, B1, or B2, but not all 3. The first option, Amendment B1, sponsored by Councilmember Lewis, includes the technical and clarifying corrections in Amendment B, but would strike entirely Section 24, removing any restrictions on command staff salaries in 2020. So that proviso would be removed. Competing Amendment B2, sponsored by Councilmembers Gonzalez, Herbold, and Lewis, also retains the technical and clarifying corrections to the capital projects and the resolution number, and affirming the intent to align with the consent decree, but amends the proviso language in Section 24 to modify how the chief's salary would be restricted, and decreases the total amount of the SPD budget that would be subject to the proviso to reflect updated information that staff uncovered related to the command staff salaries. So the main difference is Amendments B and B2 modify Section 24. Amendment B1 would remove Section 24 entirely. With that, I'll pass it back to the chair and the sponsors for discussion.
Okay. council colleagues, we have Karina Bull with us as well in case there's any questions. Council Member Lewis, I see you are the sponsor of Amendment B1. I was the sponsor of Amendment B, which I will not go into detail just because it's technical in nature. Councilmember Lewis, would you like to start with an overview of any of the items in the removal of Section 24 as you are proposing in Amendment B1?
Well, so procedurally then, or like, should I motion to move this amendment, or do you want to just? Should we just?
Do you mind if you just do an overview as well? I'd like to hear from the sponsors of the amendments before doing that.
It's pretty simple. I mean, it would just remove the amendment that we passed last week that would impose the pay reductions on the 13 non-organized executive leadership team in the police department.
Okay, and then to, I believe it's Councilmember Herbold. Did I see your name on B2? Would you like to describe B2?
Sure. B2 would, in addition to making the technical changes that central staff has identified, it would prohibit spending $345,000 in the leadership and administration BSL unless the payment for employees in command staff positions is reduced for the remainder of the year as of the pay period beginning September 2nd, 2020. The reduction is the payment for the police chief's position is reduced to $131.70 per hour, which is approximately $275,000 a year. And two, the payment for the other command staff is reduced to the lowest hourly wage in each jobs classification pay zone under the pay zone ordinance. If the department chooses to do neither or only one of these things, the police department is required to enact equivalent savings elsewhere in the police department's budget. I think I'll leave the speaking points for the moment because Chair Mosqueda, I think you just wanted a description right now. So not going to make any arguments right now for or against this particular position.
Okay, recognizing that one cannot go if the other goes, Councilmember Lewis, did you still want to move Amendment B1? Because I for one could use, I think, a little bit more of a discussion about these. And Councilmember Herbold and Councilmember Lewis, I just wanted to confirm you have sent these to central staff with sufficient time to get them reviewed by law. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Yes, I can confirm that central staff, Karina Bull, has shared this version with law, and that as is always the case, because of that work with the law department, we have a different version of the amendment before us because of their input.
And I see Karina nodding along. Okay, great. So can we do a little bit more discussion about these two, if that sounds okay to the sponsors? Councilmember Lewis?
Sure. Do you want us to just discuss them absent formally moving them, or
Okay. I think if you can do that, that allows for us to have just a discussion, and then if there's an indication that we're getting some greater clarity on how these two align, then we'll go for a motion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my understanding would be, and maybe central staff could clarify, and I'm happy to have a discussion absent moving either one of them. But that if B1 passed, it would make any other amending of Section 24 irrelevant because it would be completely gone. So it makes sense to vote on B1 first because it would make B2 moot. But in any event, I guess I'm happy to speak to Section 24 absent moving it in anticipation that we might move it to vote on it. It seems like typically we queue up the conversation when we procedurally move an amendment for consideration, but
Right. Yeah, since they're both in conflict, I also wanted to just give a chance for folks to have a discussion since this is the first time we're having that debate.
I'm happy to do it that way, Chair. Thanks. I just wanted to clarify, but I'm totally happy to do it that way. So I guess I'll speak to Section 24 on the merits rather than just on background now. So bringing this amendment today, is partly, obviously I want it to pass, but it's also just partly in the spirit of maybe having a bit more of a discussion. I did not speak on the amendment last week, sponsored by Councilmember Sawant, to lower the pay of the executive leadership team in the police department all the way down. I was on the losing side of that vote, so wanted to bring it back to have more of a discussion. And, it's not easy to bring it back because, I have had a considerable amount of public disagreements with Chief Best and other members of the police leadership team. But I do think it's also important as a matter of good public policy for us to have a consistent approach to executive pay as we're putting a budget together. And I think that executive pay across the city needs to be reevaluated, especially in light of the massive budget shortfalls and the information we just got that 2021 is going to be a really difficult year. Budget-wise, I think we should look at making sure that we have an executive pay structure that is not excessive in the city of Seattle. But I think that has to be comprehensive. I don't know right now, barring more analysis from central staff, whether or not the executive pay of the police leadership team is excessive as compared to peer cities. I don't know how we stack up relative to like San Francisco or Denver or other cities of a similar size. I also think that it kind of sets a strange precedent to just pick the police department for reducing the top executive band when we do have other departments with executive compensation. And actually, I want to give credit to Councilmember Sawant for being consistent and wanting to apply the same approach across all of the executive departments. She did bring amendments to do exactly that based on her analysis and her policy preferences. And I have respect for that consistency. But since I wasn't prepared to do this to every department in the city, to lower it to these pay bands, I don't see how I can in good conscience apply it just to the police department, despite having massive disagreements right now with the police department that I personally have. I just don't think that's consistent policy. And I think there's a lot of collateral damage to that. Because it's not just the chief or her sworn top command staff, it's also the civilian staff that have actually been extremely helpful to this council in developing our very intentional and very detailed plans about how we are going to restructure fundamentally public safety in the city. Angela Sochi, who has provided us all of the information this council has requested, and Dr. Chris Fisher, who has come and presented at this council the 911 analysis and all of the details we've requested as to the inquest into SPD's budget. Their pay is getting cut by this amendment down to the lowest band. I can't say that I've seen anything delinquent in their performance in responding to our requests with candor and in a quick and deliberate way. And I don't see why the budget director of SPD should be treated differently than the budget directors of SPU or Seattle City Light or some of the other departments where there is excessive executive compensation that we are determining here to be excessive. It just doesn't seem like a consistent policy, and I don't really see why they should warrant reductions in their pay when I don't know if it is excessive and it's not a policy being consistently applied. And I think that we should be exploring, in addition to the pay, even more ways that we can hold executive officials accountable as a council. the chief does not come up for reconfirmation. We should maybe explore having the chief of police come before the council for reconfirmation, like other department heads do. There should potentially be council confirmation for deputy and assistant chief level officials to be able to better hold accountable folks that are in those positions still of considerable executive authority. And in fact, in many cases, deputy directors become interim directors for a long period of time. So I think it would make sense to maybe expand the number of officials that come before this council for that consideration. But as it stands, I don't think this is an application of consistent policy. What I would like to see us do is take on executive pay broadly as a project in the budget committee in the fall, and really look into how we can build a consistent policy across all executive departments that right sizes and realigns executive pay, that those cuts and reductions be phased in out of consideration. I mean, in fairness for some of these folks, I mean, they were offered this position and presumably had other positions they could have accepted. And to quickly reduce the pay of one leadership team in the city just does not seem like a consistent policy. So I think in the fall we should look into this across all departments. I'm bringing this forward because I wanted to say my piece on this. If this amendment is not successful, I think the modification of Section 24 that I've co-sponsored with Councilmember Herbold and Gonzalez accomplishes some of the similar policy goals. But I worry about the precedent that we're setting, and I have just brought this forward so we can have this conversation.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Herbold, would you like to speak again? I'll call you in just a second, Councilmember Sawant.
I wanted to raise a point of order. That's why I wouldn't jump the queue otherwise.
What's your point of order?
I would just like the clerk to advise us, because I'm not sure that if a council member voted no and the no side lost in committee before, I'm not sure if the council members allow that one of those no votes. I mean, we passed this amendment 6-3 on the city council budget committee last week, and Councilmember Lewis was one of the no votes, one of the 3 no votes. My question to the clerk is the council member allowed to bring it back per parliamentary procedures in the budget committee? I think it can be raised in the full city council this afternoon, but in my understanding is that it could not come again in committee, but I might be wrong about that, but I just want to raise that. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, do you have a quick answer to that?
Not necessarily a quick answer, only because I'm not completely familiar with the policy language and whether or not it has already been voted on, so I'd ask Central Staff to also verify that. But if amendment was already considered in committee and it passed, the only way that you could reconsider it is someone on the prevailing side moved to reconsider that amendment because it did prevail at the committee meeting. And so at this point, I would request if someone did want to reconsider this amendment, you have Councilmember Lewis's amendment before you, then that would be the next step that needed to happen.
Okay, and Allie, I saw you take yourself off mute, and then I want to turn to Councilmember Herbold.
So the language in Amendment B in Section 24 was voted on, was considered by this committee last week. It is, and then Councilmember Lewis's proposal is to strike that amendment. So if I am following Amelia's advice properly, I think what would need to happen is if any council member who voted yes for the amendment that added Section 24 last week would like this amendment to be reconsidered, you need to make the motion to reconsider, and then you could move Councilmember Lewis's proposed amendment. Is that correct, Amelia?
That's correct.
Okay, so we will let Councilmember Herbold speak because I think it's important to have this discussion about the 2 options in front of us. If there were to be somebody who wanted to see Amendment B1 advance, it would need to be somebody who was voting on the prevailing side last time, and that would be somebody who voted for the language in Section 24. So just to have a robust round out of our conversation, Councilmember Herbold, would you like to provide the information from your colleague's amendment in front of us in B2?
Thank you. Yes, please. I appreciate the opportunity to address this amendment. And to say that for myself, as somebody who was on the prevailing side of the vote on this amendment, I feel in retrospect that I made an error. I did not have enough information about the impact of this vote as it relates to the police chief's salary. I appreciate that we're all trying to do a lot to address many needs with very compressed time to make decisions and collect information to make sure that our decisions reflect a full understanding of that information. I voted for command pay staff pay cap without understanding that in doing so would result in this council saying that the chief of police should be the second lowest compensated department director in the city, despite having the largest staff of any department in the city. I learned that because after voting on the amendment last week, I requested information that showed the hourly rate of every department director in the city and what that hourly rate translated to in an annual salary. I voted for salary cuts to reduce salaries in the police department. Just one of several departments with outsized salaries, as Councilmember Lewis reminds us, and Councilmember Sawant has consistently reminded us. And I also voted for those salary cuts to support the efforts to specifically reduce the size of the police department, but also to convey my and the public's deep dissatisfaction with policing leadership of the last 2 months. As Councilmember Lewis mentioned, we have very little accountability over the police chief. This position is one of few that does not face reconfirmation. There was a prior attempt in about, I think around 2008 to propose a charter amendment to correct that, proposed by then Councilmember Nick Licata, and actually require the police chief to come up for reconfirmation. But I feel like our vote to cut the chief's salary by 40%, more than 40%, puts the Black woman who had to fight throughout her career, including during the period of time when she was not selected by the mayor's chief selection team. She has faced race and gender discrimination throughout her career. And our action, again, would pay her at a lower level than almost all other department directors, all except for one. I don't want this council to compound that past reality of her struggle throughout her career by allocating wages in a way that results in a massive cut for a Black woman in a non-traditional sector. Again, the amendment itself would reduce the chief's salary to $275,000 a year, instead of how we voted last night, to the very bottom of her pay band, which is $185,000 a year. The chief currently has a salary of $294,000 a year. This is currently the third highest paid department head in the city, but moving her down to the lowest of her pay band would mean that she would be the second lowest paid department head, despite managing nearly 2,200 full-time employees, as compared to 65 full-time employees in the Department of Neighborhoods. Not only does the chief manage the largest department in terms of FTEs, larger than SDOT or either of the utilities. Again, it's important to recognize the background around the national search being passed over by the mayor's selection team, and the fact that the community rallied to her cause.
Okay.
Just a couple more things. And I just want to say to the folks who might say it was our support who helped make her become police chief, and we don't care that with last week's vote, this may be an act of disrespect to a Black woman leader. And the reason that those folks might not care is because they feel, and not only do they feel they have been disrespected themselves, they've been hurt, they've been traumatized by policing in our city. I just want to say I'm proposing this amendment not only out of my sense of fairness for the chief that I understand that you have not experienced at the hands of police, but also from a concern that I don't want the fact that the city council voted to reduce the chief's salary to the salary of a department with far few staff to become the headline. Headline that will be convoluted and mixed up with the aims of the movement to defund policing in Seattle and distract us from following through our commitments on transforming policing and supporting community-based alternatives to public safety.
Thank you, Councilmember Herbold. Colleagues, I do want to move us along. Having voted on the prevailing side, Councilmember Lewis, I understand that you were not on the prevailing side. At this point, I am going to expedite our conversation, recognizing that the issues that you brought up are important, and I would support the issues being discussed as a whole in the fall about overall executive pay. I think at this point, it's important to talk about the institution that's in front of us, being SPD. This is not a personal issue. This is not about one individual. Just to move our conversations along, I move that the council consider Amendment B2. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the council consider Amendment B2. Is there any additional discussion? Okay, Councilmember Lewis, please go.
Right, and I just want to acknowledge, totally respect the rules on being able to move B1, appreciate being able to say my piece on this, and certainly support the passage of B2.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Lewis. Council colleagues, any additional comments? Council, okay. I see Council President and then Councilmember Sawant and Councilmember Peterson. Council President, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Mosqueda. Just really quickly want to, again, strongly signal my commitment to doing the work that Councilmember Lewis described in his argument for Amendment B1, which is not being moved currently. I do think it's important for us in due haste over the fall budget session that we do take a look more globally at salaries across the board. We obviously are headed towards even more difficult than we thought economic times, and so it does make sense for us to do an evaluation of that aspect. And so do appreciate the conversation and certainly appreciate the highlighting to do this in a more holistic way, and want to signal my interest and support in making sure that the council doesn't lose sight of that pending body of work. So I'll be supporting B2 as one of the sponsors, and look forward to sort of figuring out how we chart a path forward as described by Councilmember Lewis on some of the broader issues that he highlighted in his argument.
Thank you, Council President. Councilmember Sawant, I'm sorry, Dan, did you have something you needed to say?
Chair Mosqueda, I think what you are going to want to do is have B moved. That would introduce a series of technical amendments, and then consider at B2 or B1, whichever one you want to consider, as an amendment to B.
Okay, thank you, Dan. We'll get to that process in just a second. Council President, did you have something else?
Yeah, my understanding is that B2 is inclusive of Amendment B. So I don't think we have to move Amendment B and then Amendment B2, but perhaps Allie, I think, is the one who might have drafted this, or perhaps it was Karina. If you could confirm that B2 is inclusive of Amendment B, that would be helpful, and maybe we can hear from Madam Clerk around the procedure there.
Council President, that is correct. Amendment B2 includes the same information as Amendment B, but further modifies Section 24.
Wonderful. Anything else to add, Karina? Okay.
Well, just Madam Clerk, can you confirm that we can consider that we do not have to move Amendment B, that we could just move Amendment B2 since it's inclusive of Amendment B?
That is correct. This walk-on amendment encompasses all amendments in the technical amendment, Amendment B, and those further modifications. So only Amendment B2 needs to be considered.
Excellent. Good. We are on track. B2 has been moved and seconded, and we've had robust conversation. We have Councilmember Sawant and Councilmember Peterson next. Councilmember Sawant?
Thank you. Just to clarify for members of the public, I just wanted to let everyone know that this Amendment B2 is a different amendment from B1, so it could be moved by any council member regardless of whether they were on the prevailing side of the vote on Wednesday or not. And also, incidentally, it has been moved by a council member on the prevailing side. So just to make sure that everybody knows that we're being consistent. Our People's Budget Movement and my office's proposal to reduce the bloated pay of the top 13 command staff in the police department would save $375,000, which could be directed to urgent community needs, especially Black and brown working class communities, as our movement has demanded. I am opposed to this amendment because it reduces the pay limitation that needs to be done for the bloated pay of one of those 13 command staff, the police chief. Our proposal to cut the bloated pay is not personal. We have nothing personal against any of the command staff, including Chief Best. What we object to is the bloated pay of these executives. 9 of them are paid more than all of the 50 state governors in the United States. A recent national survey of major city police chief salaries puts Chief Best's pay 45% above the national average of major city police chief salaries. A 2018 report showed that the average major city police chief was paid a total of $203,000 in total compensation. The proposed reduction would leave, if this amendment passes, it would leave Chief Best's salary at $275,000 a year for the remainder of the year, well above the average for major city police chiefs. This is simply a matter of taking the amendment that we brought forward that 6 council members voted yes on is a matter of taking resources away from where they are not being used effectively, and in fact are being wasted because on balance the police department is causing problems to our community, and taking it away from those problematic functions to fund urgent community needs. It's frankly shocking that while tens of thousands of working people in Seattle are struggling to pay rent, put food on the table, and keep safe, this council is spending time debating whether or not it is right to reduce some of these extraordinarily bloated salaries. I would note that it's not accurate to say that Chief Best would be paid lower than other department heads. The amendment, which passed 6-3 last Wednesday, would reduce the pay of Chief Best and executives for just the last 4 months of 2020. It would move her pay for 2020 from $294,000 to $258,000. Then, on January 1st, 2021, her annual pay would snap back to its original extremely high level in the absence of the fall budget that hasn't happened yet and won't happen until November, considers some sort of limitation similar to the amendment that passed on Wednesday. I find it extremely unfortunate that the council members are using consistency as a reason to have brought these amendments B1 and B2 forward. B1, of course, is not being considered right now, because if you want to be consistent, then I'd be willing to bring the amendment that you all voted no on, which is to, or you said you would not support, which is to reduce the salaries of all executives, and that way you could be consistent. I don't believe that allowing SPD to continue bloated salaries is that's the way to be consistent. And I also find it extremely unfortunate that council members are using identity to justify not limiting Chief Best's bloated salary, because it is precisely Black community members who are the most impacted by police violence and by not holding police officers accountable and by having a bloated police budget when the most urgent needs of our communities are being underfunded. And when you have chronic underfunding of social needs, the people who are disproportionately negatively impacted are precisely Black and brown community members. And so on the basis of identity, it cannot be justified. Chief Best's role in perpetuating police violence against protesters and against Black and brown community members cannot be absolved. Mayor Durkan's role in allowing police violence, despite herself being LGBTQ, cannot be absolved. Former Councilmember Harrell, who was a Black council member, his actions in allowing police violence to continue and voting yes on a racist police contract 2 years ago when he was in office cannot be absolved. We have to hold our actions to what benefits the vast majority of the Black community. That is the best way to stand and only way to stand in solidarity with Black and brown community members. And I would also remind members of the public that in response to the Black community's urging, I did vote yes on Chief Best's appointment some years ago, but when I voted yes, I warned that I was not expecting that she would be able to bring any substantive change to policing in terms of the violence, the excessive use of force, the killings that are happening of communities of color at the hands of the police. And at that time I said that it's not the fault of any one person, and I certainly would not hold her alone responsible. But what I did say is that for her to actually use her position to bring about a change in the status quo would require her to fight against the entire establishment. And believe me, from personal experience, I know what that takes, and that if she were willing to do it, I would absolutely be fighting on her side, but alongside her, but that I wasn't expecting. And of course, here we are, and unfortunately, the words I said at that time have been proved prescient. I don't want it to be that way, but it is that way. And so I will say that it is important that the council take a different position than voting yes on this amendment. And I would also ask, what has changed since Wednesday when 6 of the 9 council voted to cap SPD executive pay? All the SPD executives are paid more than the vast majority of other workers in the city. They have lost the trust of public, and the public is demanding that something be done. And this is the same council that has refused to defund the police, let alone by 50%. And now if you roll back even this by allowing Chief Best's salary to not be limited in the way it needs to be limited, then the people will know which side the council is on. And the police department has gassed the people of Seattle and then lied about it for months. The executives do not need to be paid $200,000 or $300,000 to tear gas people on the streets and lie about it. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, we need to continue with our conversation on the other amendments. Councilmember Peterson, to wrap us up, please.
I'm ready to vote.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilmember Peterson. Seeing no additional comments, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on Amendment B2?
Sawant?
No.
Strauss?
Yes.
Gonzalez? Gonzalez? Herbold?
Aye.
Aye.
Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Gonzalez, was that a yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Morales?
No.
Peterson?
Aye.
Chair Mosqueda?
Abstain.
5 in favor, 2 opposed, 1 abstained.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. The motion carries and the amendment is adopted. Colleagues, we have a handful of other amendments. I'm going to ask you to be brief in your descriptions of those amendments so we can get through this. I appreciate it. We've had robust conversations, but we have a handful of amendments, including a few that were walked on this morning. So let's get to the next amendment. Council Member Sawant, I see that we have Amendment 52, but there's also version 3. Is it your intent to have version 3 discussed instead of the 52 as it stands alone?
Yes, that's
okay.
the way I will move it.
Then let's have Ali read the summary of Amendment 52 version 3, and then I'll turn it to you to move. Thank you, Ali.
Sure. Amendment 52, sponsored by Councilmember Sawant, imposes a proviso on the Seattle Police Department's budget to prohibit spending any funds to prosecute individuals for actions taken during the Justice for George Floyd protests, and this would apply to any protests that began after May 25th, 2020. And I would just, again, reiterate, I think Councilmember Sawant, you will want to move this version and then discuss.
Thank you, Councilmember Sawant. Thank you, Allie. Councilmember Sawant, I'll turn it to you to move it.
I move to amend. I move to adopt the new amendment number 52, which is 52 version 3, which was circulated to council members prior to the meeting today. Its only difference from the published amendment is the addition of a date. And basically what it does is what we had discussed last time, which is none of the money appropriated in the 2020 budget for the Seattle Police Department may be used directly or through contract to support the prosecution of individuals for actions taken while participating in Justice for George Floyd protests.
Thank you. It's been moved. Is there a second? Going once, going twice. Hearing no second. Thank you, Councilmember Sawant. Let's move on to the next amendment, Amendment 56. We have two potential amendments here as well. I will ask that Allie, you provide us a summary of what's in the base of Amendment 56, and then potentially the, looks like competing amendments on version 2 and 56A.
Chair Mosqueda, so I'll describe Amendment 56, and then this is the 56A is actually additive. It's not really in competition. So what I'm going to suggest is that I'll describe it. You move version 2 of Amendment 56, and then Councilmember Peterson, who is the sponsor of 56A, can move to amend Amendment 56 to add what I'll describe in just a moment.
That sounds fair. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. So Amendment 56 is posted to the agenda, would add in standalone sections requesting reports from the executive. These reports were included in 3 separate provisos adopted by the committee last week. And so what was posted to the agenda didn't include the striking of those provisos. So version 2 that I'm suggesting you move first, that was distributed this morning, just makes that technical correction to first strike the provisos and then adds the new sections requesting those 3 reports. Version 56A, sponsored by Councilmember Peterson, retains all of that and adds a 4th report requesting information on the impacts of these potential budget reflections that are reflected in Council Bill 119825. So the Council has additional information informing their 2021 budget discussions, if I'm understanding correctly.
Thank you very much. Allie, do you mind putting the chart up on the screen one more time so we can see those numbers together? Thank you so much. So not in conflict, but additive. Councilmember Herbold, you are listed first. Would you like to move 56 version 2?
Sure. I move Amendment 56 version 2. I do want to note that Councilmember Strauss is the prime sponsor, and so I prefer he speak to it, but I'm happy to move it.
Thank you so much. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Council colleagues, I'll turn it back over to you to discuss this. Councilmember Strauss, please go ahead first.
Thank you, Chair Mosqueda. These are the 2 provisos that we discussed last week. Seeing your text right there, Councilmember Herbold, about moving it. Thank you for that note. Just want to speak to these 2 provisos, which specifically requires the executive to lay out a plan for fully civilianizing and or removing certain functions from the SPD from the Seattle Police Department, which could be better executed outside the chain of command or in a different city department. These reports must minimally include staffing analysis with regards to what funding is needed to support these functions for the remainder of 2020 and in 2021. The deadline for this first report coincides with when the mayor would typically support her or submit her budget proposal to City Council, and ensures that her office devotes appropriate thought to re-envisioning community safety concurrent with her office's budget deliberations. My office has laid out those major areas of SPD's operations, which should seriously be considered for full civilianization and or removal to a different independent department by bureau and specific unit. In order to meaningfully and responsibly move a more effective and efficient model of community safety, we must have deliberation and justifications with regard to right-sizing SPD. And this first report is an important starting point. It's not the end point for implementing a community-based long-term approach. I am hearing some feedback noise.
I can hear you well, Councilmember Strauss. I hear a little clicking, but I can hear you okay.
Great. I'm wondering if that might be coming from IT or one of the clerks. I will speak to the other reporting requirements held within this proviso. It is to foster greater real-time accountability of spending in the city's largest departmental budget. I am still hearing clicking from one of the clerks or IT, if just wanting to note.
Amelia, I think that might be your line if you don't mind muting for a while. Thank you, Clerk Sanchez.
Thank you, and the clerks do amazing work for us, keeping us fully functional here, so really want to thank the clerks. So the second reporting aspect of this proviso helps the city identify the fiscal shortfalls within the Seattle Police Department and potential issues with their spending year to date. We already understand that they ran through their overtime budget at the beginning of June and have used many overtime hours since then. And so this is one way to ensure that we don't run into those similar problems for the rest of the year. So this will require the executive to report every other week regarding the ongoing 2020 expenditures in key areas of interest, such as grants, contracts, overtime, personnel contracts, training, and travel. This regular snapshot every other week from SPD spending will also help inform the council's decisions with regards to next year's budget and how to best transition certain functions and funding outside of SPD. The report shall include year-to-date amounts shown as totals and percentages, and after the report, changes from the prior report as totals and percentages as well. This allows us to gauge the amounts of 2020 spending and the rates. It will flag for the public and council which of these key areas might be in danger of being overspent before deficit spending takes place. This also compels the police department to report annual expenditures since 2010. And these are the parts that Councilmember Herbold was very helpful with. For outside legal representation, retained by the city to defend this police department or its officers against lawsuits. The report shall also contain information regarding the types of claims, whether there's a pattern of claims made against the same officer, and the claimant for each action brought against the city. We can only chart a course towards bias-free policing if we take stock of how the SPD has performed in the past and the actions taken by the residents to vindicate their legal and constitutional rights against the city. SPD will also be required to detail its expenditures in 2020 thus far on weapons and equipment. Finally, the Seattle Police Department will be required to disclose descriptions and amounts of all federal grants received from 2015 to the present. These reports are so important because they provide further transparency regarding the priorities and spending of the department and help us chart a course into 2021 that is based on real-time and accurate information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And again, folks, we have a very limited time here for us today. Are there any other additional comments or questions? Councilmember Herbold, please go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to speak a little bit to the history of this item as originally proposed. This was a specific request for these particular recording requirements from Decriminalize Seattle and King County Equity Now. Originally, I had requested that these reporting requests be included in the resolution that myself and Councilmember Lewis were sponsoring, as I mentioned earlier. But Decriminalize Seattle and King County Equity Now asked for a vehicle with more teeth than a resolution. So we collaborated with the Strauss office to include them within a proposal that he was developing for a proviso that would require monthly reporting on a subset of these data points. And my interest in transparency here is, again, to highlight that there are a lot of structural impediments to doing the things that community wants us to do. We moved towards a proviso that would require monthly reporting. And we, through conversations with the law department and our colleagues, found that a proviso on the entire department's budget through the end of the year, in exchange for monthly reporting requirements, was not something that was implementable. So, so again, we're back to making a statement about the information that we want to receive. I really appreciate that we are really tying it to the mayor's proposed 2021 budget. But again, I just, for members of the viewing public who thought we were going a different direction, I wanted to explain why that is.
Thank you so much. We do have Amendment 56 version 2 that has been moved and discussed in front of us. We have an amendment to that. Councilmember Peterson, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and move your amendment to make sure that we get that piece included before any future discussion.
Thank you, Chair Mosqueda. I'd like to move to replace Amendment 56 with Amendment 56A. The reason is that would add a fourth report to what we're expecting the executive to report back to us on.
Can I just confirm, you want to amend 56 version 2 with 56A, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Peterson, would you like to speak to your amendment to 56 version 2 that is outlined in 56A?
Thank you. So 56A, it's everything that was in the previous amendment. It adds a report that we would like to see. So as I mentioned during Budget Committee last Wednesday, this amendment would have our police chief send an additional report to City Council on how our budget reductions will impact police deployment and response times. So in addition to civilianization, expenditures, and salaries, it would be about redeployment. And that will provide a fuller picture to the public. I know there's been a lot of concern expressed in the public about, if we are going to reallocate substantial dollars, if there is going to be a change in the number of officers, what might that impact look like on the ground? And so this would require a report on that. And I believe that adjustments can be made in this round. Adjustments can be made so that response times do not get worse if we are sending officers out mainly to the priority 1 and priority 2 calls. This amendment to add this report, Councilmember Strauss had some ideas about getting that even more detailed. So with hoping that our heads don't explode on parliamentary procedure, the idea would be that I would add a phrase to this amendment to provide additional detail as well. Specifically, how the proposed layoffs would affect general redeployment and response times by precinct, and then add with details, including priority level, criminal versus non-criminal, and closure rates. So just fleshing out the type of report we would like to see from the executive on redeployment and response times.
Okay, we have two options here. You can pull up the language, or please tell Patty where to pull that language up so we can either see it, or just wanted to check with central staff. Is the language that we currently have inclusive of that, and is legislative intent being expressed here via this colloquy sufficient if we were not to make that amendment in writing today? Allie?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I followed the question. Did Councilmember Peterson just describe an amendment to his amendment?
Yes.
Yes. I think we can reflect that like verbally, and we will correct, make sure it is reflected correctly for the vote this afternoon. Amelia, do you want to chime in here on any motions that need to be made to reflect additional changes to amendment 56A that would be modified as described by Councilmember Peterson.
Before you do that, Councilmember Herbold, do you have your hand up?
Thank you. I'm not quite sure if this is what you're getting at, Chair Mosqueda, but it's my understanding that this language is being offered as an amendment because the sponsor did not get confirmation or was unaware of the confirmation that this same language was included in the resolution that we addressed earlier. So it's my understanding that they moved forward with this amendment. But I can tell you that I can confirm that my staff did share that language with Councilmember Peterson's staff. I know there's tons of stuff moving around, but I do feel like this is duplicative to language that myself and Councilmember Lewis have voluntarily included in the resolution that also includes a lot of requests for additional information.
Colleagues, my hope was that if the language that's already included in 56 and now 56A is basically, we have clarified through the statements that we're making here, through this colloquy, that this type of request is being requested, and it's also in the resolution that we do not have to do this amendment on the dais, if that is acceptable to Councilmember Strauss and Councilmember Peterson, who would like to put that forward, just to make sure that we're clear as a body, but that it's been reflected here. Councilmember Peterson, please.
The reason it is warranted in both places is that, you know, what we're doing here is a proviso to a council bill, which has an immediacy to it and a strength to it that I would prefer to have it in both places. The majority of concerns I've received from residents is, you know, if the council is going to go ahead with these reductions, what is the plan and how will that look like? How will things look on the ground? And so this is really just making sure that we've got, you know, belt and suspenders. We've got the council bill, we've got the resolution. We're going to get a report on what the impact will be.
Can you verbally summarize your amendment again, please?
Sure. So 56A, which is in front of you, would simply be adding a phrase to it to provide more detail. So where it talks about how it would affect general redeployment and response times by precinct, it adds with details, including priority level, criminal versus non-criminal, and closure rates. And
does anybody on central staff have that language in front of them?
I do not have that language in front of me. This is Karina Bull. I'm the drafter of the amendment, so I'm taking notes. But again, repeating it one more time is helpful. Thank you.
Yes, I'll send it to you as well now. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to make a quick note. I would like to have heads up when there's going to be amendments made in committee, and the central staff needs to be able to have the information in front of them so that we can show it on the screen. I think for lack of being in person, obviously this would be sent around on paper. So please repeat the language again, and then Karina, you can repeat it back to us. Colleagues, we do have a handful of amendments that we got to get through. I see this as relatively non-controversial. I was just trying to figure out if there was a faster way to accomplish this. But Councilmember Peterson, could you please read the language that you'd like to add with details?
Sure. So adding to 56A, which is already before us, is some additional detail that another council member was interested in having, which I support.
Please begin with details.
Yes, so with details, including priority level, criminal versus non-criminal, and closure rates. And
Karina, did you capture that?
One moment.
If I might, Chair Mosqueda, I believe we have the language from Councilmember Peterson in an email. So just to be very precise here, in version 56A that was distributed this morning, starting on page, let's see here, it looks like, oh, there it is. Thank you, Patty. So this would be, you know, the council requests a report on impacts of potential budget reductions, and then the highlighted in yellow would be what is being added to version 56A verbally, and we would reflect it this afternoon.
Okay.
And there also, is the addition of regarding the Harbor Patrol, that it would just say to the Seattle Fire Department or other city department.
Okay, it's been moved that we add this language to 56A. I will second it. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any additional debate? Council President?
Sorry about that. I had to figure out how to toggle between all of the different screens I have going on right now with all of this varying language. So I think I, in general, understand what the sponsor's intent here. I will flag that I am concerned about the leading nature of the question here, the call to the question here, that to me seems to imply that council's budget actions will have negative ramifications, and seems to be an invitation. The language as free seems to be an invitation that the department deliver a potentially politicized report to the city council related to question here. So I think I'm flagging that I have a concern about how the question is framed, and I may just be too narrowly focused on that, but my preference would have been that the question be more fairly posed, similar to some of the other questions, including things like, for example, instead of saying how would the layoffs affect, instead of phrasing it that way, asking how does the department intend to, redeploy these personnel modifications and or prioritize E911 calls to E911 response calls to maintain responsiveness. So I'm just flagging that I have a concern related to that framing of the report and sort of my anxiety about inviting a conclusion before evaluation is done.
Thank you, Council President. Councilmember Strauss?
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Councilmember Peterson, for bringing this up. I will admit to my colleagues, I was the one emailing back and forth with Councilmember Peterson, and I additionally had emailed back again. I'm wondering, Councilmember Peterson, would you have interest in holding this addition and requiring a different report, maybe through the auditor or someone? Just as I know that I emailed you back with additional questions, and there's we're all moving in a general direction with this information called out in another place as well. So just wanted to flag that question for you. Thank you, Councilmember Peterson.
Sure. Chair Mosqueda.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. This amendment's very important for me to support the council bill. So I will state for the record that the intent of this is not to invite any report that's imbalanced, but to get at the core information. Happy to, change the language to say how the proposed layoffs might affect general redeployment, if that would help. But just wanted to state publicly that it's not the intent to encourage any reporting that's not accurate, but really to get to the heart of concerns that others may have in the community, that changes might impact things. And so we want to hear from the chief more. We want to hear these details on how things will be redeployed as we try to find these and implement these reductions. Okay.
It has been moved and seconded. It is in front of us. Colleagues, let's go ahead and move forward with this language then. If there isn't any additional conversation. Councilmember Strauss.
Thank you. And this is a question for you, Chair, or the clerks. Are we moving the language that I had in 56 version 2, or has that been supplemented or supplanted by 56A? And I'm wondering what the additional, Councilmember Peterson spoke to maybe making additional changes to his language. how does that work within this process?
Okay. If you can pull up the language that was just in front of us regarding the amendment, the motion that is in front of us is making this verbal amendment to 56A. Then we would vote on 56A as the sponsors have indicated that there is alignment with the language except for willingness to accept 56A. The question in front of us is whether or not this language is going to be adopted first before we consider the underlying language that was described in version 3 with the addition of the request.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yeah, so we'll vote on this language first, and then we'll vote on the 56, the amendment 56.
Is that correct, Ally?
I believe the motion before you is to amend the version 2 of 56, and it would be amended as described in 56A along with this additional language. So the first question is, do you want to amend the amendment? And then if that passes, you would vote on the amendment as amended.
Right.
I don't know how, and then if it fails, you would vote on the original version 2 of the amendment that was already moved and seconded.
That's right. Okay, can you please put the language up on the screen that has the described amendment language? And again, this is to 56A, amendment language to 56A, correct? Okay, Councilmember Herbold, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just in the interest of moving us along, I want to speak to the fact that I will be supporting this language because it is obviously very important to Councilmember Peterson, and I think it's important for us to move forward together. And I've already agreed to including this language in the resolution that Councilmember Lewis and I discussed earlier in today's meeting. I still do believe it is duplicative, and the explanation for why the sponsor thinks it's not duplicative seem to relate to a belief that 56 is a proviso. It is not a proviso. That was what I spoke to earlier when I explained that we couldn't do a proviso on the rest of the year's budget. But nevertheless, in the interest of moving us forward, this is the same language that's included in the resolution. It's important to Councilmember Peterson, and I will be supporting it.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Herbold. With that, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on the amendment to 56A as presented on the screen and highlighted in yellow?
Sawant.
Abstain?
Strauss.
Yes.
Gonzalez.
Yes.
Herbold.
Yes.
Lewis.
Yes.
Morales.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda.
Abstain.
6 in favor, 2 abstained.
Okay, thank you very much. The motion carries and the amendment to Amendment 56A is adopted. Now in front of us is Amendment 56A as amended. Is there any additional comments? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on 56A as amended?
Sawant.
Abstain?
Strauss.
Abstain.
Gonzalez. Herbold.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Gonzalez.
Yeah, I'm going to abstain.
Herbold.
Aye.
Lewis.
Yes.
Morales.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda.
Aye.
5 in favor. 5 in favor, 3 abstained.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. The motion carries and the amendment is adopted. The 56A is included. Okay. Council colleagues, I see that we have about 15 minutes in front of us. That gives us ideally about 3 to 4 minutes for each item. I believe we can get through this if we can do this with expediency, because after we get through these next set of amendments, the other items are very uncontroversial. We've had very little debate or disagreement on these. So let's try to get through these next few amendments. Thank you so much, Allie. Please take it away.
Amendment 57, sponsored by Councilmember Strauss, would authorize adding 2 new civilian positions in SPD's 911 Communication Center, a director and deputy director, and request that the mayor includes funding for these positions in the 2021 budget.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Strauss, would you like to move this amendment?
Thank you, Chair Mosqueda. I move Amendment 57 to Council Bill 119825.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Strauss, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Thank you. I'll make this brief, Chair. 911 Communications Center program positions. Approximately 5 years ago, the Seattle Police Department hired an outside consultant to evaluate and make recommendations regarding the city's 911 Communications Center. One of the most significant recommendations was adopted by Seattle Police Department was the eventual civilianization of the entire chain of command of the 911 center, due in part to the fact that emergency communications has become a very technical and software-driven field. It is not realistic to expect captains, lieutenants, and sergeants who rotate in every few years to be able to truly manage such a complex operation. The first step towards full civilianization took place in 2018 when 3 civilian managers were hired to take over the day-to-day management of the communications center. This has already greatly enhanced the functioning of staff and operations. The only 2 remaining positions, which are sworn officers and which the consultants recommended to be civilianized and Seattle Police Department agreed to civilianize, are the captain and lieutenant assigned to the 911 center. This amendment signals the City Council's intent to create the positions of director and deputy director of the 911 Communication Center as recommended by the independent consultants and agreed to by Seattle Police Department, and to call for the mayor to propose funding for both positions in her 2021 budget, which we shall take up in September. As we move to separating the 911 Center from the Seattle Police Department, full civilianization of its leadership structure is both prudent and timely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for summarizing that so succinctly. I also will note, Councilmember Sawant, I appreciated your comments earlier today that you are interested in bringing back the overall question of 911 in the fall. So thank you for those comments earlier, and I really appreciate that discussion, which we will be bringing up in just a few weeks here. Additional comments or questions? Councilmember Sawant, please go ahead.
One of the demands of the Justice for George Floyd movement is to take the 911 call center out of the control and chain of command of the police department. Unfortunately, this budget amendment does the opposite. It reinforces the bureaucracy over the 911 call center operations within the police department, because the director and deputy director positions are being created within the police department, not in another department. I think we have to be clear that civilianization doesn't equal removing from police control, because the fact that these positions are, quote, civilian, end quote, is totally meaningless. I mean, who cares if the managers of the police department are sworn officers or not, because at the end of the day, it's a question of what actual difference it makes. And for all intents and purposes, with this kind of setup, those 2 positions will still be part of the police chain of command. Either way, I would be supporting this if it were concurrent with transferring and 911 out of the police department, but it is not, unfortunately. So I will be voting no. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sawant. And again, looking forward to that conversation in the fall as this issue comes back. Other comments, Council colleagues, Councilmember Strauss, and then Councilmember Herbold.
Thank you, Councilmember Sawant. Those points were well taken, and if there's any additional language that you would like to see added to this to ensure that it is clear that the intent is to move this entire department out of the Seattle Police Department, I welcome that, because I am committed, along with many of the colleagues here at Council, to moving the 911 Communications Operations Center out of the Seattle Police Department. When it's, as it is my understanding that this will take some time, it is important for us to take as many quick steps to improve and to implement this transition as quickly as possible. If we have sworn officers, in that department, those sworn officers won't necessarily move as the entire 911 center is moved out of the Seattle Police Department. If we are able to make the transition to having the civilian control and command of the 911 center today and in this year, we will be able to transfer that in a more holistic manner. So my apologies if this came off as me trying to slow down. I am intending to do just the opposite and move as quickly as possible to transfer the 911 center out of the Seattle Police Department. Thank you, colleagues.
Okay, Councilmember Herbold, to wrap us up, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm not quite sure if this is going to wrap this up. I really appreciate the intention of this amendment as proposed by Councilmember Strauss, but I also really strongly agree with the observation made by Councilmember Sawant that we are assuming, with passage of this amendment as written, that the 911 would be staying in the police department. So. Understanding, Chair Mosqueda, your earlier expression for not wanting amendments on the fly, I wanted to see what your tolerance level would be for simply striking out the words Seattle Police Department so we can move forward on this amendment.
Councilmember Strauss, I see a thumbs up. Okay, the motion, Councilmember Herbold, would you like to make that a motion? And I'm going to look to Ally to make sure that we're capturing that.
So do we have this is a new section to Council Bill. All right, so I move to amend the proposed new section to Council Bill 1198-25 to strike the words Seattle Police Departments.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any additional discussion on the verbal amendment to amendment number 57? Seeing Councilmember Sawant, please go ahead.
Yes, I have a question for Ally. Obviously, I support not creating these positions inside the police department, but I'm not clear how you can create positions but not assign a department home for those positions. So I'm not sure how that would work, and if Ally could respond to that.
So ultimately, and I believe my colleague Dan Eater may be on the line who drafted this, so he may have more to add here. But in general, this is creating new positions. I would suggest that what would possibly need to happen is actually we are creating the positions in the police department right now in 2020 and should be adding language to say something along the lines, and the council expects that with the transfer of 911, the 911 unit to another department, that should include these new civilian positions. So I might suggest that we actually, and by we I mean you council members, hold this amendment, give us a half an hour to figure that out and take it up in a short hour and 5 minutes at full council, because I can't say with confidence that it is reflecting, it is doing what Councilmember Herbold and other council members have intended, and I just need to confirm that.
Councilmember Strauss, I saw your thumbs up. Would you like to pull this amendment?
I would be happy to if my colleagues would prefer that. Whatever works best for the body.
Okay, it's Council President, please.
I just really want to flag the amount of pressure work that we are creating for our council central staff and legislative department by going down this path. So the motion has been made, it's been seconded. I think we just need to call things to a vote and decide issues before we convene, before we adjourn today. I feel really strongly about this. It's 12:56 p.m. We made commitments to Council Central staff that we would end by 1 p.m. today in order to allow them enough time to package and repackage things, and people need breaks. So I'm just really frustrated with the direction that the conversation is going right now that will effectively result in Council Central staff having to work over the only break they're going to get today. So I think we just need to call it to a vote and see where it lands in terms of the underlying motion.
So it's been moved and seconded that we strike in SPD. I think that the issues about implementation are important. The question, though, is not about whether or not the council is committed to making this move in the fall. It is. I would like for us to vote on the motion, the verbal amendment, and then vote on the underlying amendment as the council president has encouraged us to do to get us through this. So with that, council colleagues, I would like to call for a vote on the amendment as verbally described. And Councilmember Herbold, can you again tell us the few words that you're striking in your verbal amendment?
Sure. I move to amend the proposed new section to Council Bill 119825 to strike the words Seattle Police Departments.
Okay, it's been moved and it's been seconded already. It's been described again. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll on removing the Seattle Police Departments as a verbal amendment from this amendment number 57?
Sawant? Sawant?
Yes, sorry, I was thrown off because I thought I was second in the roll call today, but yes on this amendment to the amendment.
Thank you. Strauss?
Yes.
Gonzalez?
No.
Herbold?
Yes.
Lewis?
Yes.
Morales?
Yes.
Peterson?
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda?
Abstain.
6 in favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstained.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. The motion carries and the amendment to Amendment 57 is adopted. Amendment 57 as amended is in front of us. Is there any additional conversation? Seeing none, Councilmember Sawant.
Just very quickly, I wanted to clarify that I will be voting no on the amendment as amendment because I'm not confident that the change would successfully remove the position from the SPD, so I will be voting no, but I did support removing the word Seattle Police Department from the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Sawant. Councilmember Strauss, did you have your hand as well? No. Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. I do believe that Councilmember Peterson is first in the roll call today. Just want to confirm that. It does not seem like there's additional comments. So, Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll on Amendment 57 as adopted?
I'm going to call Sawant because of the budget order.
Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that they were different from budget and full council. That makes sense. Got it.
So, Sawant?
No.
Strauss?
Yes.
Gonzalez?
Abstain.
Herbold?
Yes.
Lewis?
Yes.
Morales?
Yes.
Peterson?
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda?
Abstain.
5 in favor, 1 opposed, 2 abstained.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, the motion has carried and the amendment is adopted. Ali, please remind us where we are at on the list of amendments here.
We are now on Amendment 58, sponsored by Councilmember Herbold and Chair Mosqueda. This would impose a proviso on funding for the community service officers in the police department's budget to ensure that implementation of any budget reductions do not impact these positions. So this is not changing any funding for these positions. It's just ensuring that for the remainder of the year that resource is retained to support those positions.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Herbold, would you like to speak to this?
I would. Thank you so much.
And move it, please.
Oh, let me start there. I move Amendment 58 related to the CSO officers and a proviso on their budget.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Herbold, please go ahead.
Thank you. As Ali explained, the amendment imposes a proviso to restrict the purposes for which some of the police department's budget may be spent, specifically the remaining budget appropriations for the community service officers in the collaborative policing budget. Budget summary level can only be used for that intended purpose. The purpose of the proviso is to ensure that the CSO dollars will be spent on these purposes, cannot be taken to be spent on other purposes or plug other budget holes. These are civilian positions for which the council has worked over many years to re-implement in order to take staffing pressures off of sworn officers. These unsworn officers are able to prioritize non-emergency services associated with law enforcement, thus freeing up police officers to better respond to 911 calls. CSOs assist with mediating disputes, follow up on calls for non-emergency services, help residents navigate services, support programming for at-risk youth, attend school and community-hosted events. Some of the work also includes assisting homeless people and individuals struggling with substance abuse to access programs like diversion opportunities, housing, and behavioral health services. CSOs serve to bridge the service gap on non-criminal calls for service and perform a variety of really important public safety related community service and outreach work that does not require the enforcement authority of a sworn police officer. The CSO program existed for 33 years until 2004, when it was gradually reduced until it was finally eliminated due to budget cuts. And as I mentioned, the council worked for many years to put the money in the budget, to restart the program up again, to put it in the budget again when it wasn't implemented by the executive. And it's taken several years to get it up and running, and we want to make sure that we continue moving in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been moved and seconded and discussed. I will just add, this is a very important element for me. Thank you for allowing me to co-sponsor this in partnership with our partners at Teamsters 117. Really appreciate you putting this forward. Any additional comments? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on Amendment 58?
Sawant,
Yes.
Strauss,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Herbold,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda,
Yes.
8 in favor, none opposed.
All right, unanimous. The motion carries and the amendment is adopted. Thank you very much. Allie, if you could put that chart up one more time. I believe that we are almost at the end of this list here. Councilmember Morales, I understand that you have an announcement on the last two items here. Could you please provide us with a quick update?
Yes, thank you. Colleagues, as I mentioned this morning, we should very shortly have provisos number 59 and 60 back from law. So we will be walking that on and distribute them to you as quickly as possible. And we'll talk about those at full council.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilman Morales. I'm understanding that you're pulling amendments 59 and 60 for now.
For now, yes.
Thank you. Okay, council members, I want to honor what Council President has asked us for. We have just 4 more items, and I believe that these are non-controversial. I will also note that we have a real urgency to get done with this meeting, so I'm going to ask colleagues to be very brief. Council President, my commitment to you is that I'll keep us moving along. If we have 2 minutes on each one, we will be done at 1:15, and that is the desire, folks. Okay. Item number 3, Madam Clerk, could you please read the item into the record? Allie, please.
Madam Chair, I believe you need to move the bill as amended and vote it out of committee.
Let's get this puppy out of here. I'm so sorry. Okay. Council colleagues, we have reached the end of these amendments on our first item here. I will move that Council Bill 119825 as amended be moved out of the committee and to full council for consideration. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any additional comments? Okay. Will the clerk please call the roll on the recommendation that the bill as...
Councilmember Mosqueda,
I'm so sorry, Councilmember Swan, I did not see your hand. Did you have a comment?
Yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Mosqueda. This vote, just to make sure all the members of the public who are watching this know what we're doing. This vote essentially adopts the new 2020 budget, which enacts the mayor's austerity on top of a budget that already did not meet the needs of working people. The People's Budget Movement in my council office, and certainly the hundreds, if not thousands, of Black Lives Matter activists have fought for all the important victories that we have won as amendments to this budget, including every reduction to the SPD. And I will say more about that when we vote at full council meeting this afternoon. However, on balance, this budget cuts tens of millions of dollars from the essential work of the city across departments like parks, roads, and libraries, rather than increase the Amazon tax to eliminate the need for austerity, which is technically and legally possible, but it requires political will that is absent on the council. On balance, this budget continues to spend more of the city's discretionary funds on the police than on any other department. And for all those reasons, I will be voting no on this austerity budget. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any additional comments? Seeing none, we will have an opportunity to talk about this bill in more detail at full council. Seeing no additional comments, will the clerk please call the roll on the recommendation that the bill pass as amended?
Sawant,
No.
Strauss,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Herbold,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda,
Yes.
7 in favor, 1 opposed.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. The motion carries, and the committee recommendation that the bill pass as amended will be sent to the full council for consideration. Madam Clerk, can you please read into the record item number 2? Sorry, item number 3. Madam Clerk, you may be on mute. Could you please read item number 3 into the record?
Agenda item 3, Council Bill 119824, relating to the city's response to the 2020 COVID-19 crisis, for discussion and possible vote.
Thank you very much. Allie, thank you for walking us through what's in front of us in this item number 3.
Council Bill 119824 would accept the federal coronavirus relief fund resources and appropriates that funding. There's just one amendment to this bill. It is a technical amendment sponsored by Chair Mosqueda that just corrects an appropriation line related to transfer of funds from the Department of Finance and Administrative Services to the Human Services Department. And again, this is just a technical correction.
Thank you very much. Council colleagues, I move that the committee consider Council Bill 119824. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I'd also like to move this technical amendment. I move to adopt amendment number 5 as presented on the agenda and described by Allie. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any additional comments or questions on item number 3, Council Bill 119824? Seeing none, thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you, Allie, for walking us through that technical amendment. Will the clerk please call the roll on the adoption of Amendment 5?
Sawant,
Yes.
Strauss,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Herbold,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda,
Yes.
8 in favor, none opposed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The motion carries and the amendment is adopted. Amendment 5 is adopted. Are there any other further comments on the bill as amended? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll on the recommendation that the bill pass as amended?
Sawant,
Yes.
Strauss,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Herbold,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda,
Yes.
8 in favor, none opposed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The motion carries, and the committee recommendation that the bill pass as amended will be sent to the Seattle City Council full committee for final consideration. All right, Madam Clerk, could we please have item number 4 read into the record? You may be on mute, Madam Clerk.
My apologies, council members. I'm having a really bad time with the connection here. Agenda item 4, Council Bill 119818, amending Ordinance 126000, which adopted the 2020 budget for briefing and possible vote.
Thank you very much. Council Bill 119818 is now in front of us. Allie, would you like to describe the amendment that is in front of us that is technical in nature as well?
Thank you. There was one amendment posted to the agenda, Amendment 9, that made a technical correction to the section of the bill that would transfer the Victim Advocates Unit from the Seattle Police Department to the Human Services Department. A new option distributed this morning, Amendment 9A, includes this technical correction, but also makes that transfer contingent upon the ability of the victim advocates to access the information from within the Human Services Department and the systems they need to do their job. So I would also describe this as technical in nature. It continues to implement the council's proposal to transfer that unit, but ensures that they have the systems in place in order to operationalize that fully. And the 9A is sponsored by Councilmember Herbold.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Herbold, would you like to move Amendment 9A?
I motion to move to adopt amendment number 9A.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. The bill's in front of us. The amendment is in front of us. Councilmember Herbold, would you like to speak to it?
Thank you. In the interest of time, I am going to just say that I think Allie did a fine job of explaining the technical amendment.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Herbold. Council colleagues, is there any additional comments or questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. It's been moved and seconded to adopt Amendment 9A. Will the clerk please call their roll on the adoption of Amendment 9A?
Sawant.
Yes.
Strauss.
Yes.
Gonzalez.
Yes.
Herbold.
Yes.
Lewis.
Yes.
Morales.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda.
Yes.
8 in favor, none opposed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The motion carries and Amendment 9 is adopted. Are there any further comments on the bill as amended? Councilmember Sawant.
Thank you. As for agenda item 2, this vote also reflects the budget as a whole, which overall fails to meet the needs of working people. So I'll be voting now, and I'll say more about this later in the full council meeting.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Sawant.
No.
Strauss.
Yes.
Gonzalez.
Yes.
Herbold.
Yes.
Lewis.
Yes.
Morales.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda.
Yes.
7 in favor, 1 opposed.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. The motion carries, and the committee recommendation that the bill pass as amended will be sent to Seattle City Council full council for consideration. Okay, we are almost there, folks. In terms of technical, we have a few last items. Madam Clerk, will you please read into the record item number 5?
Agenda item 5, Council Bill 119819, authorizing a 2020 acceptance of funding from non-city sources for discussion and possible vote.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move this bill so that it's in front of us. I move the committee recommends passage of Council Bill 119819. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. The committee recommends passage of the bill. Allie, I'll turn it back over to you for any walkthrough on this item.
Chair Mosqueda, in the interest of time, for items 5, 6, and 7, I don't have any comments unless council members would like me to describe the bills, but these are part of the supplemental budget package, and there are no amendments to them. They are necessary to fully implement the proposals in Council Bill 119818, as well as some in potentially in 825 as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Allie. I'm seeing no additional hands. I will take that as all of folks' questions have been answered in our previous deliberations. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on the passage of the bill?
Sawant,
Yes.
Strauss,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Herbold,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda.
Yes.
8 in favor, none opposed.
Thank you. The motion carries. The committee recommends that the bill pass, and this recommendation will be sent to the Seattle City Council for full council for final consideration. Will the clerk please read into the record item number 6?
Agenda item 6, Council Bill 119820, amending ordinance 12600, which adopted the 2020 budget for discussion and possible vote.
I move the committee recommends passage of Council Bill 119820. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the committee recommend passage of the bill. Is there any additional comments? Seeing none, and Ally already walked us through this. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on Council Bill 119820?
Sawant,
Yes.
Strauss,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Herbold,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda.
Yes.
8 in favor, none opposed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The motion carries, and the committee recommendations that the bill pass will be sent to the August 10th Seattle City Council meeting for final consideration. Will the clerk please read item number 7 into the record?
Agenda item 7, Council Bill 119821, amending ordinance 125724, which adopted the 2019 budget, including 2019 through 2024 capital improvement program for discussion and possible vote.
I move the committee recommend passage of Council Bill 119821. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Central staff has already addressed this. I see no questions or comments. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on Council Bill 119821?
Sawant,
Yes.
Strauss,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Herbold,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda.
Yes.
8 in favor, none opposed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The motion carries. The committee recommendations that the bill pass will be sent to the Seattle City Council, full council for final consideration. Will the clerk please read item number 8 into the record?
Agenda item 8, resolution 31954, relating to the city's annual budget process, repealing resolution 28885 and stating intent that the city will consider a one-year budget proposal for 2021 for briefing and possible vote.
Council colleagues, I move that the committee recommends adoption of resolution 31954. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any additional conversation or comments? Councilmember Herbold, please.
I'm sorry, is this the resolution related to the biennial budget process?
Yes, and I saw Ally, she did have her hand up. If she'd like to provide a quick overview of this first, if that would be helpful.
And I was under the impression that you had an amendment, Chair Mosqueda. I have real concerns about committing to a one-year budget process moving forward. I have a number of speaking points to my concern, but I was going to not go into them because I was under the impression that you had an amendment that might address some of the concerns that I had.
I do. It was a good segue. Thank you very much, Councilmember Herbold. Ally, would you like to walk through the amendment?
So resolution 31954 would remove the requirement that the city considers a biennial budget in even calendar years, allowing for the writing of a one-year budget, and signals the council intent to determine if future legislation is needed to consider biennial budgeting in future years. Traditional practice has been to provide a biennial budget in even calendar years in which the first year's budget is adopted and the second year's budget is endorsed. This, as transmitted by the executive, this would essentially remove that requirement indefinitely until council takes additional action. Amendment 1, sponsored by Chair Mosqueda to the resolution that was distributed this morning, would allow the mayor to propose a one-year budget to council for 2021 only, recognizing the unusual circumstances that we are currently in. It also adds a request for a number of actions to achieve full fiscal transparency between the executive and legislative branch, including submittal of a 6-year financial plan, a report from the budget office in consultation with council central staff outlining a plan for a non-modified true biennial budget process, and a report outlining a plan for upgrading the city's data sharing platforms to minimize dependency for obtaining data for the legislative branch and the public.
Thank you very much, Allie. Councilmember Herbold, thank you for prompting the question about what was in the amendment. I too am very concerned about moving away from a biennial process. This is something that has not been discussed with council, and I think it requires robust dialogue. But more importantly, I think it actually needs to move in the opposite direction. So the language that you see from us in the amendment really sets us up for a transparent and accountable conversation, both with the public, by making sure the information is made available to both the public and the legislative department in a routine fashion. I think thinking through what a more robust process should be is critical, especially at this juncture, as we're seeing, forecasts in some ways be politicized and used as a tool to try to interrupt processes. We need to have a clear and transparent way for us to share information back and forth from the executive's office with the legislative branch. I think it's also important for us that we set this process up going forward so that we not only stick to a biennial budget, but that we have, for example, 6-year forecasting, so that can help us create a more transparent budget going forward. I appreciate Allie and the summary that she's provided here and the language that we have in the amendment in front of us to set us on that course for greater stability, transparency, and I think accountability, both between branches and with the public. Councilmember Herbold, anything else to add to that?
Just thanks to you for putting forward this amendment. I hadn't had the ability to think of how to make this resolution that I was on the verge of voting against more palatable, and I really appreciate your forward thinking to do so.
We'll appreciate it. And there's some great examples that we can pull from as we think about other strategies. King County, the state, for example, have forecasts that are produced in very predictable ways. These are strategies as well as many years out, like a 6-year forecasting, I think that can help us out in the long term, regardless of whether or not we had the downturn that is COVID. Okay. Additional comments or questions? Seeing none. Council colleagues, we have Amendment 1 in front of us. I move to adopt Amendment 1, recently distributed and described by central staff. Thank you, Allie. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that Amendment 1 be considered and adopted. Is there any additional comments or questions? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll on Amendment 1?
Sawant,
Yes.
Strauss,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Herbold,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda,
Aye.
8 in favor, none opposed.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Amendment 1 is adopted. We now have in front of us item number 8 as amended. Is that correct? Do I need to? Okay. Wonderful. So, Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll? I'm not seeing any additional hands. Call the roll on Resolution 31954 as amended.
Sawant,
Yes.
Strauss,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Herbold,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Chair Mosqueda,
Yes.
8 in favor, none opposed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The motion carries. The committee recommendation that the resolution be adopted as amended will be sent to the Seattle City Council full council meeting for final consideration. If there are no objections, the council rule relating to referring legislation from a committee meeting to that meeting after Thursday at 12 noon will be suspended to forward the agenda items 2 through 8 to today's Seattle City Council full council meeting for final consideration. Hearing no objection, the council rule is suspended and the agenda items 2 through 8 will be considered at today's city council meeting for final consideration or at the president's direction. We have received the end of our agenda finally. So thank you. I saw Allie take a big sigh of relief, a huge amount of appreciation. We did not do it by 1:15 as I promised the council president. But I am going to summarize and wrap it up by just saying thank you. We do not have any other items in front of us for full consideration. So thank you very much. Are there any items for us before we adjourn? Council President, please. Council President.
Thank you, Chair Mosqueda. Just really quickly for Madam Clerk Sanchez, can you please advise whether the full council meeting can begin at 2:30 p.m. as opposed to 2 p.m.?
Council President Gonzalez, the recommendation to do that would be to start at 2 and recess, or we can be delayed by 5-10 minutes if we need to for the beginning of the meeting. 30 minutes. I'd recommend that we just recess and then, convene and then recess.
Okay. See you all in 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, council members. Appreciate it. Councilmember Herbold, did you have something for the good of the order? Nope, just saying goodbye. And I think a thank you was included in that hand. So thank you, central staff and all of our teams. We'll have more thank yous to come. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.